Chapter 34. Within the blessing of education, the proliferation of broadcast communication and the printed word for the distribution of knowledge lies the problem of discerning what is of value and what is deliberately placed within these sources to mislead and misinform. Herein is the next level of understanding that discernment as to what is appropriate and true must be applied to all input. Within each is the source of such guidance. The ability to tap into this wisdom is present within all and latent within most. The lessons in learning to discern what is appropriate and what is not are many and frustrating. For most, these are trial and error with difficulty in figuring out what purpose experience serves in life. Once the concept of discernment is understood, it is learning to use this important tool that is at the basis of many of life's trials. It then becomes a useful tool that enhances experiencing knowledge into wisdom. It is to be understood that discernment is a tool that replaces what has been called judgment. Each can then release the self-deprecation that comes from judging self and others as being right or wrong. Discernment is an internal process that eliminates looking outside of one's self for the cause of the seemingly difficult experiences that plague the human life. The dictionary lists insight as an appropriate synonym. Discernment can be applied in a before or after mode. It is wise to consult one's inner feelings carefully before undertaking an experience. It can be further applied in retrospect to understand what lesson can be gleaned from an experience that is happening or has happened. Unless a lesson is learned, it is likely to be repeated until it is discerned. Then a realization of what the intended lesson is, happens within the understanding of the individual or group. The practice of discernment is part of the application of the law of allowance. To consider the appropriateness of an undertaking in either the before, during or after mode requires a letting go of the emotions involved in the experience so that the logic of it can be considered. This may be an ongoing process of consideration before the totality of the lesson is gained. Even partial understanding and realization of its purpose in the totality of the life experience allows for greater knowledge to become wisdom, which in turn allows the individual to apply this and change their pattern of expression to include different possibilities. In order to consider the situation and its circumstances, there is a letting go that is necessary in order to allow the mind to consider the possibilities of the who, what, why and how of the total picture. If there is considerable open-mindedness, possible scenarios can be played out in order to determine the greatest number of possibilities. Through this process, the more logical meanings become clear. Through this release, needed solutions often become accessible because the mind has been allowed to reach inward to access the available wisdom from within. Each has a storehouse of available wisdom that is obtainable through the practice of discernment. There must be a desire to lift personal experience out of the daily morass of pointless repetition, judgment, and blame. In order to shed the victim consciousness, the individual must be willing to turn their view of life from looking outside for the cause of situations and circumstances to looking inside for the causes that invoke what the law of attraction has brought into experience. These causes are to be found within attitudes, opinions, and self-talk, for the mind is speaking within in a constant flow of chatter. Within this internal conversation are the keys to many of the patterns of thought and behavior that set up the situations and circumstances that are being experienced. Changing these patterns that are the basis for the creation of the life pattern is not a simple task, but a good beginning can be made with the awareness that it all begins with discernment. The world does not just happen to anyone. It is invited through the law of attraction, for like attracts like. A victim attitude draws not only fellow victims into one's life, but also abusers to provide the victim experience. As each begins to accept the responsibility that the cause is within their own pattern of experience, and is willing to accept this idea, then the practice of discernment is possible. The discerning individual will find it necessary to logically assess their attitudes and opinions. Are they judgmental and blaming of others? Are there always reasons that the self is not responsible for what is going on in the life experience? If so, then denial of personal responsibility is blocking all progress and the cycle of victimhood is established. Until such time as this can be looked at with logic and the pattern discerned, it remains locked into the experience. It is necessary to desire to change these basic controlling factors, look and listen to what is thought and said and purposefully change the basic pattern. The results will take time and diligent correction in order to see the changing pattern in experience. However, the pattern must change if the intent and purpose are held in focus and thought and words are changed. Statements made can be restated in a positive mode, this then changes the first statement. Thoughts can be rethought. Simple as this message content is, there are few if any who cannot find application of these ideas in their daily experience. The practice of discernment is an ongoing focus through many levels of experience. Looking within at attitudes, opinions, statements, and thoughts often reveals interesting and applicable causes. Each is encouraged to apply these suggestions in an ongoing fashion. Discernment is further practiced in considering and choosing what information is true. It is a wise practice to set up the discernment process by stating in thought that one wishes to discern truth before listening, watching or reading. In that way the mind discards what is not true and retains what, if anything contained, is true. What is truth for one is not always truth for another. Each pattern of experience sets up a different ability to glean what is necessary to know. It is encouraged that this suggestion be used when reading these messages. Chapter 35. As the sequence of events seems to accelerate and lineal time to pass more quickly, the chaos will grow. Each individual will experience their own sequence of events that are only a small portion of the total picture. The controlled media will report only segments of the true picture. When viewed from the perspective of the planetary whole, there is a far greater degree of chaos now present than can be perceived by humanity. Those yet in zones of calm have little frame of reference for the experiences of those who are in the midst of war, geological, or weather phenomena. Though greater global awareness is present, yet there is little exchange of actual experiential trauma between these separate experiences. It would not serve the planetary wholeness if there were such a connection so that all were experiencing the trauma of those within the distressed areas. Those that appear to be uninvolved serve to hold the equilibrium of the planet steady as the chaos is experienced elsewhere. There is a balancing that takes place. It is planned to increase the experience of chaos in order that this balance may be forfeited. This plan to deliberately upset the balance by increasing the chaos beyond the planet's ability to retain its balance is based upon the theory that once the imbalance reaches a certain point, it can be pushed into a negative vibration that will block its access by positive energy foci. In other words, the planet would then be wholly owned by those of negative energy vibration and would then be no longer accessible by those of balanced or positive energy vibrations. In order to accomplish this, it has been thought that it was necessary to lower the vibrational fields of the inhabitants to a point that survival of some would be possible when the conversion to pure negative energy is completed. The installations of massive energy converters in order to bombard the ionosphere have been planned for this purpose. The testing of these converters appears to be for reasons other than what is planned. Indeed, they are to protect the planet from positive foci and appear to the planners to be accomplishing their intended purpose. The question remains as to whether the theory on which all of this is predicated is one that will produce the desired change of polarity, and if it were applicable, what are the implications that would accompany the result? When change is undertaken within the laws of the universe, the thought-thinking principle can and does work through all the possibilities and probabilities and reaches a conclusion as to feasibility. When change is attempted without this inclusive aspect of wisdom, there is the inherent danger that unknown factors are disregarded and the outcome is likely to be unstable at some point in the process. This then brings the situation to the consideration as to how far free will can be allowed to operate if the use of it involves massive risk to whole segments of creation. Free will with regard to individual experience is inviolate. However, when will is focused into a situation that is for the deprivation and destruction of not only the free will choice of evolving consciousness, but to the point of destruction of the soul energy at the basis of life expression, then careful consideration must take place as to how this situation may be handled. The situation not only demands consideration and decisions, but also involves the decision of what intelligent foci may be involved in making that decision. In other words, a stacked deck cannot exist either for or against the continuation of the experience. This creates a considerable dilemma in coming up with a consortium of qualified and empowered beings willing to become involved in such a situation, for serving in this capacity puts their own evolution at risk. Evolution is in reality a growing participation in responsibility. It is not a movement to a utopian existence of lesser involvement or fewer responsibilities. Just as maturation into earthly experience naturally involves greater participation and responsibility, so also does evolvement into the higher dimensional realms. A great talent search was initiated in order to find a cohesive group willing to consider the dilemma that the situation upon this small planet contains. To say that it covered a great deal of manifested reality is an understatement. The vested interests in the future of this planet are varied, well established and of intensely determined purpose. At the irrefutable basis of any solution is the will of the human population on the planet involved. It is then self-evident that those who would retain their control of the planet would make every effort to make sure the inhabitants decide that change is undesirable. Herein lies the purpose of the massive release of communication devices and the focus on the retention of the victim consciousness. The foundation of victim consciousness has been carefully laid within the religious foci from the very beginning. It has allowed for control of the progress of mankind not only in the discovery of the godlike qualities that are inherent to all, access to the understanding and application of the universal laws, but also to the understanding and ability to relate to the creator mind that is available within the outflow of undifferentiated energy at the basis of all creation. The key to the entry of the gathered wisdom foci is held within the collective mass consciousness of humanity. Unless the individual and collective desire of humanity for freedom from the oppressive outside intervention that has been present on this planet for thousands of years is focused toward an end to this situation, it cannot and will not change. The only possible help that can be given at the moment is to focus energies into the available thought realms surrounding the planet in the hope that individuals will accept these subtle suggestions to augment the desires that are already there to bring forth a change within the collective thinking of mankind as a whole. This seems like drops into an ocean of misery, but in accordance with the free will principle, nothing further can be done. The presence of craft from positive origins, what are called extraterrestrial visitors, among those of negative and earthly origin as well as visible energy patterns imprinted on the surface of the planet has been increased. It is hoped that these will stimulate curiosity and trigger into awareness some of the volunteers that now risk their level of evolvement in service to their fellow humans. These messages are received and circulated by individuals that are responding to this plan. Those of you that hear of these, read and respond to them are in reality coming into harmony with the energy of concern and the desire to assist that is being generously focused into the atmosphere surrounding Earth. The electrical charges that are being forced into the energy fields encircling Earth are being placed there in an effort to block all positive support for the planet and its inhabitants. Fortunately, all efforts in harmony with the laws of the universe are supported by the intelligence of thought thinking which finds ways to circumvent such plans. If mankind can indeed be triggered to desire its freedom, despite the plans to block any such assistance, then the universal laws can and will support them. However, the focus is to be held on that which is desired instead of retaliation and resorting to the old methods that have failed to bring mankind manifestation of their desire for change in the past. In other words, the focus must not resemble that which it is desired to leave behind. The human population that desires to experience the opportunity to evolve in freedom from oppression must focus on what is desired and let go of the experiences of the past. These have led them in a continuous circle of repeating what has been taught to them by the example of their oppressors. The same blood, DNA of those oppressors flows in the blood of humanity. The question remains as to whether there are enough humans on this planet that have evolved beyond those genetic aberrations that do not serve their advancement. Can they focus on the desire for freedom from the repetitious pattern of life as they know it and transcend it into a new paradigm of experience? Can they now live those experiences into wisdom? End chapter 35.